Have you ever wondered why it's often the dumbest people who think they're the smartest? And why people who are really good at something constantly doubt themselves, while those who have no clue often come across as super confident? I bet you have, because it's no coincidence, it's psychology. More precisely, it's the Dunning-Kruger Effect, a phenomenon that shows how closely overconfidence and incompetence are linked, and why it is precisely a lack of knowledge that makes us believe we know everything. The effect was described by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger. They became aware of this phenomenon because of a curious case from 1995 when a man in the US tried to rob a bank and smeared lemon juice on his face to do so. He was convinced that the juice would make him invisible to surveillance cameras, just as invisible ink only becomes visible on paper under certain light conditions. When he was later arrested, completely astonished, he is said to have remarked, "But I had lemon juice on my face." This absurd belief in knowing something and being certain, even though the knowledge was completely wrong, inspired Dunning and Kruger to conduct one of their most famous studies. In 1999, they asked people to assess their own abilities in tasks involving logic, grammar, and humor. For example, participants had to solve puzzles, answer grammar questions, or judge how funny certain jokes were. But it wasn't just about the correct answers. After each task, participants were also asked to indicate how well they thought they had performed, and how they ranked themselves in comparison to the others. The result was surprising, and remains a classic in psychology to this day. It showed that the less people actually knew or could do, the more they overestimated themselves. They considered themselves above average, even though they were objectively far below average. The reason? They lacked the knowledge to even recognize their own mistakes. And that is precisely the core of the Dunning-Kruger effect. This pattern becomes particularly clear when you take a look at the graph from the original study. It shows how far perception and reality diverge. On the horizontal axis, you can see the participants divided into performance groups, from the worst on the far left to the best on the far right. The vertical axis shows the percentile, that is, how well the participants performed in relation to the rest of the group. The red line represents the actual test results, that is, what the participants actually achieved. The blue line shows how well they thought they had performed. In other words, their self-assessment. And here the effect becomes very clear. The worst participants were far below average in terms of performance, but believed themselves to be well above average. The best participants, on the other hand, achieved top scores, but often rated themselves lower than they actually were. This pattern is typical of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Those who know little do not even realize how much they are lacking, while those who are competent tend to doubt themselves because they understand the depth and complexity of a topic better. And what became apparent in the study is something we encounter in real life every day. The Dunning-Kruger effect does not only affect a few test subjects in an experiment. It can be seen everywhere, on the internet, at work, in political discussions, or perhaps even in ourselves. To understand exactly how this effect works, let's take a look at the typical learning curve. Imagine you are learning about a new topic. At first, you know nothing about it. But as soon as you acquire just a little bit of knowledge, something interesting happens. Your self-confidence skyrockets, and you think to yourself, "This isn't so hard. I've got this." You have now reached what is known as Mount Stupid, the peak of overconfidence. Here, many believe they have understood everything, even though they have only scratched the surface. And this is exactly where we encounter the Dunning-Kruger effect in real life, every day. For example, we encounter this effect particularly clearly in politics. People speak loudly, present simple solutions, act confidently, and are suddenly regarded as authorities. Not because they have in-depth knowledge, but because they are rhetorically strong. They appear to know what they are talking about. They stand there like a wolf among sheep, charismatic, loud, and confident. But what is missing is real competence. And this is where it gets exciting. Rhetoric alone is often enough to convince people, even when you are completely wrong. How exactly this works, and more importantly, how you can protect yourself from it, is shown in this video above. You can also find the link again below in the video description. You'll be surprised how easy it is to win arguments just by how you speak, even when you're actually wrong. So, take a look at it right after watching this video. But now, back to the learning curve. The more you learn, the more you realize how complex the subject really is, which is why your self-confidence declines. That's why you now find yourself in the valley of despair. And here, you become aware of everything you don't know. And that can be frustrating. But if you stick with it, continue learning, and gain experience, you will move on to the next stage, the path of insight. You will understand the connections better and better, make more informed decisions, and develop a new kind of self-confidence. And in the end, you will achieve what it's all about: lasting security. No bragging, no superficial knowledge, just real skill, calm, thoughtful, and reliable. You're no longer at the top, but you're stable, because you know what you can do. And more importantly, you also know what you can't do. And this is where we see an interesting contrast. If those who are ignorant overestimate themselves, why do those who are truly competent doubt themselves? This phenomenon is called Impostor Syndrome. It describes people with genuine competence who doubt themselves, not because they are incompetent, but because they recognize the depth and complexity of the subject. They know how much they don't know, and it is precisely this awareness that makes them doubt themselves. Impostor syndrome is, in a sense, the other side of the same coin. While some people cannot recognize their weaknesses, others doubt themselves precisely because of their strengths. They underestimate themselves, out of modesty, a sense of responsibility, or because they always view their knowledge in relation to the big picture. And that is precisely why it is so important to be aware of both effects. Only those who understand how easily our self-image can deceive us, in both directions, can grow and see more clearly. If you found value up to this point, I'd appreciate your support by subscribing and giving this video a thumbs up. Your input matters, so feel free to share your thoughts or suggest topics that interest you in the comments section below. But we're not done yet, so let's keep going. The good news is that you can protect yourself from the Dunning-Kruger Effect, not by knowing everything, but by becoming aware of your own limitations. Here are a few concrete strategies that can help you. First, accept that you don't know everything, and that this is completely normal. This attitude protects you from falling into the trap of overestimating yourself, because true learning begins with admitting, "I don't know." Second, doubt is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of maturity. Competent people constantly ask themselves questions. They don't doubt because they can't do anything, but because they understand a lot, and that's exactly what makes them better, not worse. Third, get honest feedback. Ask people who have more experience than you, and take their feedback seriously. Not all praise is helpful, but every honest criticism will help you progress. Fourth, learn deeper rather than faster. A little knowledge is dangerous, especially if it's only superficial. So read books, listen to experts, question your own beliefs, and ask smarter questions instead of giving hasty answers. And fifthly, observe your own self-confidence. Ask yourself regularly, is my self-confidence based on genuine understanding or on a quick aha moment? Superficial knowledge often feels more secure than real knowledge simply because it seems easier. However, this overconfidence is often accompanied by another error in thinking, one that often reinforces the Dunning-Kruger effect in everyday life without us noticing: the false consensus effect. This causes us to overestimate not only our own knowledge or abilities, but also the extent to which other people share our views. We then quickly believe that everyone sees it the same way I do. This misjudgment gives us an additional sense of security, even when we are wrong, and that is precisely what leads us to appear even more convinced than we should in discussions, on the internet, or in everyday life. Because when we assume that the majority is behind us, it is more difficult for us to take other opinions seriously or question our own thinking. Here too, the same basic attitude as with the Dunning-Kruger effect helps. Being aware that our point of view is just one of many, and actively listening instead of jumping to conclusions. Because those who understand that others often think very differently not only become smarter, they also become more relaxed. If we summarize everything once again at the end, it becomes clear. True wisdom does not consist in knowing everything, but in recognizing one's own limitations. People who are willing to question themselves and constantly learn new things are the ones who truly grow. They don't brag, they listen. They don't know everything, but they know where they should be cautious. And that is exactly what distinguishes them from those who only believe they understand everything. Ask yourself, where have you perhaps overestimated yourself? Or where did you feel that everyone thought the same way you did, even though that wasn't the case? The first step toward greater clarity is to ask yourself these questions honestly, because real change begins with honest self-reflection. I really hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Post your thoughts in the comments box below and check out our other videos. For example, the one where I show you how rhetoric can influence discussions and how you can protect yourself from it. This video is the perfect follow-up to what you've learned today. Have fun with it, and see you next time.